So far we've talked about why DOM manipulation is exciting, why you should care, the different sites that use it, the endless possibilities, the games, all the exciting things, but we still haven't really talked about what the DOM actually is. So we're going to do that in this video. To start, let's just define it. DOM stands for Document Object Model. The meaning of those three words will make a little more sense in the coming slides, but let's start by defining it at a higher level. The DOM is the interface between your JavaScript and your HTML and CSS. It's basically a bunch of special JavaScript objects, JavaScript methods, functions that we can use to interact with our HTML and CSS. We can change things, we can add elements, remove elements, change colors, animate things, all sorts of exciting ways to interact with our HTML and CSS. On this slide, I talk a little bit about how the DOM is constructed and why it's called the Document Object Model. So when we load up an HTML page, it looks like this in our browser, and it's just some simple HTML. So we have a title, an A tag with my link as the text, and an H1 with my header as the text, and that's it. So when I open this up in the browser, I see this, but behind the scenes, the DOM is created. It's constructed from this right here. So what I mean is that this HTML is turned into a bunch of JavaScript objects. Each object models one of these elements. That's where we get the object model part of Document Object Model. So again, just to reiterate, we load up HTML in the browser displays things to us like this, but behind the scenes, it actually makes this model of every single element with a JavaScript object. Just like we modeled my dog Rusty using a JavaScript object, he had a property name and another one breed and age. These objects are fundamentally the same thing, except the content is different. They're going to have things like type of tag, text, source attributes, color, background color, text size, all different properties that are all contained inside of each object. We're definitely going to spend a lot of time working with these objects, so the specifics aren't important. All that I want to emphasize here is that we load up HTML, it's displayed in the browser, and the browser takes that HTML and takes each element and turns it into an object. So that covers the object model part. What about the document? So you can see here, this is a little diagram of the type of structure that we get from the DOM. The top level object that everything is contained inside of, our entire model of the HTML and CSS, is called the document. So we can go to any web page at all. So I have Google open and I'm just going to type in the console the word document. And when I do that, I get this big thing that comes back, this big object, except it doesn't look like a JavaScript object. It's not really what we would expect. That's because the browser is kind of hiding it from me. What it actually is showing me is what the HTML looks like as text, but it's not showing me the actual objects that are modeled on this HTML. So to get that, we need to use console.dir, which is another method on the console object, and we're going to console.dir document. All that this will do is print out the entire document object in this object syntax that we're familiar with. So you can see it's just a regular object, just like the ones that we've written on our own, like just the same as Rusty, the dog object, except there's a lot more information here. So we have things like fonts or images, links, but we also have things like body, and this body represents the entire body. So every element that you see on here is inside of body. So if I open body up, you'll see that we have a whole bunch of other properties, including one called child nodes. So child nodes shows us that there's a div, there's a script tag, and there's another div inside of the body. And if we went to elements, we would see that. So here's the body. Inside of body, we have that first div, we have a script tag, and we have the second div. And then let's say we open up that third div, we would expect to see two more divs inside of that second div. And if we go over to the console and we look at this second div, and then we look at child nodes, we see, okay, there's two more divs. So as you can see, the DOM gets really huge really fast. There's hundreds and hundreds of different properties and methods and different nodes and this whole crazy structure of nested objects. It's just so much stuff. It's one of those times that I mentioned at the beginning of this class where you're going to have to be comfortable not knowing everything. I can tell you now that most developers don't know half of the properties here. I'd say they work with about 10% at most. There's so much more stuff here that we almost never need to use. And then sometime down the line, something comes up and we have to do something we've never done before. We Google it and we find out, Oh, all right, so that's what the onQChange property is for. I had no idea. And that's really what it's like to be a developer. Up until now with JavaScript, we've been working in a little bit of a small controlled world where we learn about functions and objects, we learn about variables, and there's a finite number of ways of doing things. And there's a very specific subset of knowledge that you just need to know. With the DOM, now we have this huge ecosystem to work in, so many properties. So I just want to reiterate, there's so much here. We're going to focus on the important pieces, but the goal is not to memorize, the goal is not to master every single property. Again, 10% at most is all that you need to be a competent web developer. Okay, so let's go back, and I just want to go over this one more time, summarize what we talked about. So the DOM stands for Document Object Model. It's the interface between your JavaScript and your HTML and CSS. It's how we can use our JavaScript to make things interactive. It's how we do things like add a new element to the page, or change the href attribute of a link, or change the background image on our body, or how we can get the value out of a form, or we can do custom validations and animations, add interactive elements where you click and some code runs. All these different possibilities all stem from the fact that the document object model connects our JavaScript with our HTML and CSS. So the object model part of document object model tells us that it's a bunch of JavaScript objects that are modeling elements in our HTML. So we have an A tag here. We end up with an object here representing that A tag. And then we end up with another object representing this H1 tag, which we see over here. Lastly, it's called the document object model because everything lives inside of that one object called the document. It's the root node where everything else lives inside of. So in the next video, we're going to start writing some code.